Hi everybody, I wanted to shoot this video. Of course I'm using my eyeball camera, on a different computer today, just because my original computer that I shot most of my videos on with the eyeball cameras left the farm. Well, I wanted to do a three quick movie reviews, including this one. So I wanted to, get this started. The first one is this movie here, The Craft. Granted it was, released back in 1996, but, this movie stars Fairuza Balk, Robin Tunney, Neve Campbell, and Rachel True. It's about the four girls that are all high school girls. This is Neve Campbell here. This is Fairuza Balk right here. This is Robin Tunney and Rachel True. And it's about the four of them. And this movie, is so pre, 9/11, 2001, and it shows you, what life was back then in the mid-1990s for high school age people. And it's like a really different kind of setup from what it was back then, compared to today. And I sometimes do find myself wishing that we could go back to pre 9/11 times and have not such crazy stuff going on, but such is life. And it's like I also noticed that there's a lot of people dressed a whole lot differently. That pretty much says it a lot right there from the way the four girls are dressed. Like they dressed different back then in the 1990s, to be honest. Of course, this movie is also set in a private Catholic school, which is a place that everybody's known for wearing uniforms every day anyhow, the students, that is. One thing I liked about this movie was the character Sarah, who's played by Robin Tunney. Sarah is the more normal of the four girls, and she's a down-to-earth kind of girl. Sarah, of course, was the girl that I probably would have hung out with back when I was in high school, even though this is telling my age, back in the 1990s, the early 90s. One thing that stuck out in my mind about what happens to Sarah in the movie is that there's this one guy that she happens to like at her school named Chris. Sarah wanted to be friends with this guy, Chris, and Chris was, of course, a football player at the school, and Chris was initially nice to Sarah when Sarah first gets to the school, but that all changes one evening when Sarah refuses to go home alone with Chris after Chris and Sarah go out on a date. The next day at school, Chris goes around and tells everybody that Chris and Sarah had been getting their freak on with each other the night before, and that Sarah was the worst partner that Chris had ever had in his whole life. Chris, of course, Sarah catches wind about this from one of the other girls, Nancy, when Sarah's in class. Well, Sarah goes and confronts Chris about his lie on her about the night before, and Chris doesn't even acknowledge that he had lied on her, but instead Chris tells Sarah to stop begging him for a date because it was unbecoming, and then Chris just turns and he proudly just walks away in the other direction. As Chris walks away, Sarah then tells Chris to basically do something with himself, and she walks away in the other direction. After the incident with Chris, Sarah and the other three girls go out in the woods and they decide to cast spells to make their lives better. For example, Rochelle is being made fun of because she's not white. That would be this girl right here, by a girl who is white on the same swim team as Rochelle for the school, and the white girl's name is Laura Lizzie. That's teasing Rochelle. Bonnie has severe girls would be played by Neve Campbell right here. And, you know, it's from an unspecified accident. And Bonnie wants her skin to be completely healed. Nancy Downs, played by Fairuza Balk right here, just wants to be powerful and basically more in control of her personal situation at home and life and elsewhere, due to Nancy not feeling like she's in control and not having a good life and being basically shunned at the school. A few days later, the four girls go out to the beach by, of course, the ocean, and they do a summoning of a Wiccan deity into the girls' circle. Towards the end of the girls doing the summoning, Nancy appears to be hit by lightning while Nancy is holding a knife in her hand. When the three other girls, Bonnie, Sarah, and Rochelle, wake up, Nancy, who was the one that wanted more control and power over things and people in her life, is walking towards the three girls on the water, but she's coming towards them. After the summoning, things begin to happen in a positive way for Sarah and Bonnie with Bonnie's scars. Chris starts acting interested in Sarah again, and Chris acts crazy interested in Sarah. Bonnie has the burn scars on her back magically, literally healed up. The doctor that Bonnie had been seeing for the reconstructive procedure on the scars then proclaims that the procedure worked on Bonnie's back. As for Rochelle, who was being made fun of for not being white, gets even with Laura Lizzie from the swim team by causing Laura's hair to fall out in clumps and make Laura go almost entirely bald in retribution for Laura making fun of Rochelle. This whole situation with Laura's hair falls out causes Laura to quit making fun of Rochelle, as Rochelle is trying to do some diving exercises with the school's swim team. Things for Nancy, who wanted to be in more control of her personal life and things in it, become more interesting for Nancy as time passes as well. One evening, Nancy comes home from being out somewhere. Nancy's mom asks Nancy where she had been, and Nancy tells her mom that she'd been out. Then Nancy's mom gets into a fight with mom's lazy, sleazy, trash-talking boyfriend, who, by the way, is John Capellos. I noticed that, and I was looking at Tony and I said, "That's John Capellos." I was like, it looks an awful lot like him. I went and looked on Wikipedia to see who it was, and yeah, it was John Capellos. I was like, that looks too much like him to not be him. Oh, it was him, all right. And of course, John Capellos' character. Nancy's had enough of him being so nasty towards Nancy and her mom, and Nancy screams for both mom and boyfriend to stop fighting with each other. When Nancy starts screaming for the couple to quit fighting, there's an explosion and a small fire in the kitchen behind Nancy by the microwave. Shortly after the fire and the explosion in the kitchen is put out, John Capellos' character, the boyfriend, suffers what appears to have been a heart attack, and he up and dies. Of course, what ends up happening is the boyfriend leaves Nancy and her mom a whole bunch of life insurance money, which Nancy and her mom used to move out of their tiny trailer and into a nice apartment or townhouse somewhere else in town. And Nancy's life had started to improve, but she still, of course, hasn't gotten away from her mom, who Nancy could just not care for at all. And Nancy despises her mom a lot. And of course, when the things start to get really interesting, the things start going wrong with the fellas that the girls had initially cast to make their lives better. For example, that football player Chris that I mentioned before, he has begun to stalk Sarah because he's gone completely crazy from, you know, her just basically telling him, get lost, go away, I'm not interested in you, and he's just, you know, like stalker crazy with her, and he, you know, tries to choke her one night in his car, you know, because she wouldn't let him give him a massage. And, you know, like Laura Lizzie, that blonde-headed girl that was making fun of Rochelle, Laura has gone almost totally bald, and, you know, more of her hair has kept falling out in big clumps. Rochelle finally sees what happens to Laura one day when Laura's sitting there on the floor of the shower crying hysterically. And, you know, Laura's hair has kept falling out, and the girl looks horrible because it's like this whole part of her head to like here, like around back, has just completely gone bald, and there's like hair like back in here. As far as Nancy goes, Nancy has turned into a control freak and has become something of a bully, because Nancy now feels like she could be in charge of her own life situation and in control of the other three girls, being Sarah, Rochelle, and Bonnie. You know, one night as Nancy is driving a convertible down the street with the other three girls riding, Nancy starts making all of the red lights turn green one right after another. That same night, you know, Sarah's telling Nancy, you know, you need to calm down, you know, back it up, you know, it's getting a little out of hand here. And Nancy, in retaliation, causes another car on the street to lose control and spin out of control towards the car that the four girls were in, and causes that car to just barely miss hitting the car the girls were riding in that night. Bonnie, of course, has turned into a stuck-up snob because, you know, where her back is all healed, now she's starting to get attention from guys in a positive way. Bonnie thinks it's funny that she's getting all this attention from the boys because when her back was messed up, you know, the guys wouldn't pay any attention to her or made fun of her to her face. And of course, Sarah, decides that the other three girls are now spiraling out of control. And of course, as I mentioned, you know, Sarah tells them to back it up, you know, and she's done, you know, messing with it. Of course, Nancy tells Sarah that Nancy doesn't care, and, you know, everything's all fine and dandy. You know, and it just goes on. One thing that I found is interesting about this is eventually, you know, Nancy does cause Chris to go flying backwards out a window, and it does show, you know, Nancy completely spiraling out of control and just going, you know, off and, you know, harming people and herself. What it teaches is, you know, it teaches about the power of, you know, friendship. It also shows how hard life can be for high school kids. I mean, I know it was bad back in the 1990s for kids, you know, having been in high school in the 90s myself, but I can only imagine what it's like now in the 21st century, because it can be pretty hard. But I mean, this shows about, you know, like life as it was back then in the 1990s in, you know, San Francisco, California. It also shows, you know, like, you know, what happens when four people bond together to, you know, help their lives get better, and then like what happens when they lose control and go completely deep end. It also shows, you know, how to be that you should be responsible for the things you do, because they can backfire on you. You know, be careful for what you do and how you do things, because it can always come back on you. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will have another video here for you soon.